Hey, Last in Line Nation, welcome again to episode number 2 of the Project 222. And for college students, for college athletes, stories from the ex-college athlete who balanced faith in that environment and is here to encourage you. And today we have a great guest. I want to introduce you to Zach Clinton, and I want to read some about Zach. So he's a Christian motivational speaker and podcaster. His heart is to help provide hope and encouragement and motivation to all those around him. Zach played Division I college baseball as a pitcher at Liberty University, and he currently works at the American Association of Christian Counselors. He's actually currently the chaplain of Liberty University's baseball team as well, and loves to help athletes. He has a podcast that we're going to talk about called the Built Different Podcast. And man, what I love about Zach is that he is all about Jesus. He's all about helping people. And he is for 30 minutes all about this show. Welcome to the show, Zach.
Mr. John, thank you so much for the opportunity. Love what you're doing. So I'm just glad to be here.
Man, it's a privilege, man, to have another guy on that has a platform that's as powerful as yours. And, you know, you come from a great pedigree of leadership and Christian values and also plans. I guess you are engaged from what I understand. Right. Yeah. Engaged to be married. So that's a good thing. This guy is on track here. So we want to dive in because, you know, Zach, before we do, though, I want to tell the audience anything else about you that might help them connect on a personal level. Like, just kind of share briefly your heart for either ministry or just in general towards, you know, what you're trying to accomplish in the leadership and the faith standpoint.
Absolutely. So I got the opportunity to grow up in a household led by two of the most Christ and God-fearing people that I've met. In my mom and my dad. Growing up, my parents were always heavily involved in ministry. My dad is the president of the American Association of Christian Counselors. He founded Ignite Men's Ministry, which is a ministry that I now help him lead and head up. And then my mom actually leads and heads up a women's ministry called Extraordinary Women's Ministry. They travel the world, give weekends in a sense of hope to men and women all over the country to kind of come and just find a time of worship and growing in relationship with God and with others. So I was always heavily involved in ministry growing up. But for me personally, you can get lost in that, right? In your parents' faith. And so for me, growing up in high school, I was always labeled, I would say, as the kid that, you know, his parents were such great believers, as you would say. So he's got to be this great guy, right? And then you realize that just because you're able to recite Bible verses at a Christian high school and you're able to pass your Bible tests and your exams and your parents have a great faith, that means nothing about your own. And so what I had to realize at a young age is that I had to personalize my faith. And I had to say, you know what, this is something that I need to dive into for myself and really see what it's all about if I'm going to actually get something out of it. So that's a little bit more about me and my story starting out as a young kid. And where my parents brought me up. And I'm so thankful for my mom and my dad and just them leading the direction for me and kind of setting that pavement for me to walk on.
Man, we're going to talk directly to college athletes. And you're an ex-pitcher in college, Division I, and you know the pressures that come with that. And you know the expectations and just some of the added responsibilities and added workload that you guys carry. Man, talk about just maybe briefly in those days, you know, aside from your parents, give us an idea of maybe some mentors or leaders early on in your life in that time during your athletic career.
So many people I can attest my athletic career to, I would say, started out at a very young age, right? So I got invested into 3 sports from the time I was 4 or 5 years old, which was baseball, basketball, and football. And I loved them. I mean, I was passionate about athletics in general, especially those 3. And so from a young age, I had people, I'll come back to my dad here, but Andy Barrick was one of my youngest coaches. He developed me into kind of the player that I was going all the way up to high school. I had high school coaches like Coach Mike Morris and Randy Tomlin. Randy was a ex-former major league pitcher from the Pittsburgh Pirates. And, I came up through, I was always a middle infielder. So I was a second baseman primarily, swung the stick, right? So I batted leadoff. And then he really developed me into a pitcher. So I would never have pitched if it wasn't for Randy Tomlin. And it's funny because you circle back years later, I get to college and I had coaches like Jim Toman, who was my coach my first 2 years of Liberty, then Coach Scott Jackson, who's still currently the coach of Liberty I had in my last 2 years. And I look back and I'm like, I was a pitcher only in college. And if it wasn't for people like Randy who set the framework of what it meant, because I'll be honest with you, I was never the guy who had the most talent on the field, right? So I wasn't the guy when I pitched, I didn't throw in the 90s. I was more of like a low to mid 80s. On a good day, if it was hot, I was maybe touching upper 80s. I just had movement on my fastball. And so he taught me what it meant to compete. And I think learning to compete, right, and being a competitor is, if you have the talent, obviously, but that's the intangible piece, right? You got to be a dog and you got to absolutely work your rear end off if you want to make things happen. And so those are some of the people that really invested in my life. But my dad is the one person that has always invested completely into my life from a young age. He showed up at every game. He was there for me. He pushed me. He motivated me. And he's the guy who I still look up to, right? He's still my coach. I'm in counseling. I'm pretty much following in his footsteps, in his own shoes. I go to him every day. He's like my mentor. So he's the guy that I attest, everything to, my athletic career, who I am as a person. He molds me every day, and I appreciate him.
Yeah, and I would say, he's been the standard. He's been the yardstick that you've, compared, because that's what good looks like. Dr. Tim Clinton, for those that don't know, we know that he is the epitome of leadership and just being a great mentor. And so what about those guys that you mentioned along the lines in college, like for the athlete we're talking to today, if they're looking to sort of track that mentor or kind of pursue or intentionally identify somebody that they can go, hey, that's who I want to mark after. That's who I want to sort of model my behavior. So what qualities would you say, maybe one or two, that stood out to you about those guys that sort of came alongside you in college?
Yeah, I think they're men of high character, first and foremost, right? I think they pushed me past my limits. And that's something that I genuinely appreciated. People that push you outside of your limits because they see something good in you, right? So many times I feel like young athletes, we look at coaches and we're like, why are they doing this to us? You know what I mean? Like they're killing us right now. And at the end of the day, that circles back around. And one day you're going to be working behind a desk, right? You're going to hang up your cleats, and all of a sudden, all of that season of your life is gone in the snap of a finger. But looking back full circle and saying, man, I miss the grind. I miss how coach used to push us. I miss these things. And the other thing is that those men are people that took a genuine interest in me as a man, right? And I think that really helps solidify a good coach, is somebody that not only is a recruiter coach, right? He can recruit the high athlete, but he can also invest in their life and take a genuine interest in somebody.
Yeah. Oh man. I mean, for somebody hearing that, they may be thinking, oh, wow, maybe I need to lean into some of these opportunities that, these people that are pushing me beyond my comfort zone are actually not against me. They're actually for me. And that takes a shift in thinking for a 20-year-old or 21-year-old. And so I think that's a great point that you mentioned, because it really is about pouring into this next generation beyond the lines, beyond the white lines of the field. And I think making them better people and helping build them and their character means a lot more than a box score does. And so I hope that the people listening to this get it, that we're about passing on that torch and letting these athletes learn from the journey that you've been on. And so you saying that is huge for somebody right now that hears that. Man, I would say, as we move through this and just kind of identifying some of the challenges and some of the journey that these athletes are on. And like we said, the profile, high profile athletes are under a lot of pressure. There's a lot of expectation because they're so gifted at that sport, and people expect a lot from them. So talk about maybe either a challenge in your college life as a Christian, or what you see, because you're involved every day with the college athlete. You're still around the game. What do you see as being maybe the biggest struggle for this age group that are athletes in college?
For me personally, I went through a time during my college career where it was a very uncertain time. Okay, so I was a sophomore. I was coming off a good freshman season where I had pitched a lot in relief. I was going to have the opportunity to then come back and start my sophomore year. And I'm in a bullpen 2 weeks before the season starts. I'm a pitcher, and I break my leg in the bullpen. Okay, I mean, I'm talking the most freak accident, horrible landing. My foot slipped out from under me, and I had an avulsion fracture in my fibula. And so couldn't put any weight on it, out for the season. My leg. And so I'm sitting there thinking, really, like, why in the world is this happening? And so I think the first thing that athletes need to understand is sometimes setbacks are just your greatest chance for an opportunity for growth. They really are. And so my dad, he said to me one day, because I remember I was sitting in my house, I was sulking, I was having just one of those bad days, right? Because I wanted to be out there and play with my brothers and my teammates. And he's like, you know what, bud? I got one thing to say to you. You can either start working out or you can keep hanging out. And that to me was, he always said that when it came to athletics, but that was like the full circle of my entire life. So it was spiritually, mentally, physically. And it was that sense of the people that are always hanging out, those are the ones that get in trouble, right? Because they're easily distracted. They get lazy, they get weary. But the people that are working out and they're grinding and they're still pushing and they're trying to live every single day as if it were their last, right? They're not trying to just go through the motions of life, but they're trying to do everything, like you said earlier, to a standard and a standard of excellence in all that they do. And they're pushing themselves. That is something that every college athlete can possibly do. And that was something that I had to make the switch in my mind. Because I would say my freshman and sophomore season, they were pretty average, to be honest with you. I look back at it. But until I made that switch and said, you know what? This is so much more than a game. This isn't just baseball for me. This isn't just football, lacrosse, whatever sports you're playing. But actually understanding that, you know what? I'm not just an athlete. I'm not just a baseball player, but I'm a person. And that's the thing. My dad works with a lot of high-profile professional athletes. And so I've seen it even at the highest stage, and seeing these expectations on these athletes that we place on them, right?
Of course.
And they're just normal people who struggle with the same things, right? Being a dad, being a husband, being just an 18-year-old kid who's uncertain about what he or she wants for their future. And then you're playing a game. So the game is the fun part. Right? Life has its own struggles, but when you're there, my challenge to athletes is when you're in between the lines, when you're at practice, whatever you're doing, working out, conditioning, just be all there for however long, 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours of your day, be all in.
Yeah, man, that is so good, man. And so many things are just going off inside me as you're talking, because you're just hitting so many good points. And man, I just can't help but think when you're talking about how that was a pivotal moment in you building who you become as a person, because a lot of these athletes think that, these setbacks, oh man, I'll just deal with this and I'll, the attitude kind of starts to slip, but I'll bounce back. So they bounce back, but yet nothing inside them changes. They bounce back physically, but as they're going through that struggle, that valley, I think it's important. And it requires a level of maturity, but it also goes back to that piece of somebody coming alongside them too, which is crucial to point this out. But it's about the journey and who they become along the way, because those setbacks don't end in high school. They don't end in college. Like whoever you are will follow you throughout the journey. So that person, if you don't sort of empower them, equip them, and sort of become this person of character and resilience, these things are going to travel with you along the journey. Would you agree?
Completely agree. And I think what those setbacks and challenges teach us is to not take a moment for granted, right?
Yeah.
Because it can be gone in the snap of a finger.
Yeah.
So it's understanding that when you don't take things for granted and when you buy in to the process and who you are as the man or the woman that God has created you to be, when you buy into that, that's when life becomes fun because you're living where your feet are. You're living in the present. And guess what? The present is a gift. That's why it's called the present.
There you
So
go.
live in the moment.
There you go. That's good, man. Well, I mean, what great segues into some of these next points. And we talked about your personal physical situation with breaking your leg, and that is quite an anomaly that happened in the bullpen to a pitcher. But what would you say? Was there a defining moment? We talked about your journey faith-wise and coming up, in a household that that you did, but yet you still had to make the shift and that commitment personally inside you to own your faith. Is there a defining moment you can think of throughout that journey as an athlete? Is there anything that was just bam, like a light just went on, or man, anything you would have done differently about a certain situation?
I think back honestly to that moment of breaking my leg. And when I think back to it and just going through the motions of life, I was a Christian at the time, right? Like I loved Jesus. I knew who he was, but I was not sold out and invested in my relationship with him whatsoever. Completely just going through the motions, very stagnant in my faith, I would say. And when my dad said those words to me about, you got to stop hanging out and start working out, right? Start doing something about it.
Mm-hmm.
It pushed me to really get outside of myself and really start pursuing God at a more deeper and intimate level. And I really believe that God uses our moments of powerlessness to draw us closer to him and to his heart for us. And so my thing is, when I was so unsure, everything was so unclear, right? Why did this happen to me? And I'm starting to ask all these why questions. I started to reframe them into, man, no, God, I'm not going to ask you why, right? Because your plan is perfect. And just because your plan is perfect does not mean that it's always going to be pleasurable to me, right? Yeah. I'm not going to feel like it's perfect all the time.
Yeah.
And getting outside of my own feelings and outside of my own emotions and just listening to him and saying, you know what, God, in the absence of clarity, you have given me this invitation for intimacy with you. So growing in my faith walk, right? And actually saying, you know what, this is my time to press in closer to the heart of God, not pull away. The further I pull away, the further away I'm going to stray, the more things I'm going to reach for, the distractions are going to come in, right? And it was almost like this sense of distraction turned into a sense of desperation for me, because it was like, if once I eliminated all the other distractions and I said, you know what, God, you're the only other option that I have. You're all that I want. I don't want anything else. I had this healthy sense of desperation, right? And then it leads to a healthy sense of dependence. And that's something that's so hard to understand, especially in a world and in a culture that preaches independence, especially to men, right? It's like, you can do this on your own, overcome this. You got this, brother.
Yeah.
But at the same time, God's saying, no, surrender it all to me, right? Lay it at the foot of the cross, give it to me and grow with me, be dependent on me and watch what I can do with you in your life. And that's what God did. And that's something that I was just forever thankful for.
Man, I mean, I don't know if you had this written down or not, but there's a part that you talked about, and I'm going to have to watch this back because I'm going to steal it. But you said a statement about clarity. And what did you say? The moment of clarity.
So in the absence of clarity is an invitation to intimacy with God.
That's, man, I tell you what, that's for somebody as well. I think that's a great point of wisdom, really profound. And I appreciate you saying that, because I got something out of that for sure. Man, incoming college freshman, I talk about transition, we talk about that big step, and all of a sudden you're not the big fish in the little pond that you might've been in high school. Right. And so you're among all these finely tuned athletes just like you, and this bar gets raised another level. And, regardless of the sport, it just is, if you're on scholarship, you're going to make it worth this college's while because they wanted you athletically. So you have something to live up to there, man. what advice would you give to yourself, maybe coming in as a freshman in college to play a sport, and really not knowing the full package that entailed from a spiritual standpoint, from a personal, emotional, standpoint, just some of the rigors physically that you face? What advice would you give, if anything, to yourself coming in?
I'll never forget coming in as a true freshman. Coach Toman was the head coach at Liberty at the time, and he sat us all down, in our first ever team meeting. So we're coming up to all the big dogs, right? Like the seniors that have just, like, they've battled at Liberty. They're preseason All-Americans. We had probably one of the most talented teams I've ever been on my freshman year. And I'm coming in weighing $160, like soaking wet, right? I'm this tiny little guy, probably the tiniest guy on the team. But I'm coming out, like you said, you were a big fish in high school, right? If you're getting recruited to play any sport, any college, you're a good athlete. So the thing is, you're coming in, you got a little chip on your shoulder. You're feeling good about yourself. But he sat us down and he said, I want all of the kids who are the MVP of their high school team to stand, right? Every kid in the room stood, sat back down. I want everybody that was all-state, first team all-state, to stand. Every kid in the room stood up and sat back down. And he went through this whole entire lineup of things. And at the end of it, I'll never forget what he said. He said, you know what? It's not my job to show you that everybody in this room is talented. If you didn't see that, that's your own fault. But what's going to be your job specifically is figuring out who's going to separate themselves from the rest of the pack. And so my thing was, as a true freshman coming in, and I look back at my freshman and sophomore season, and I would say, man, at the end of the day, first off, your athletic career is like this in the grand scheme of life, right? Regardless, it could be this, but it's going to be cut off at some point. You're going to hang up the cleats. Yeah. So at the end of the day, what you do, who you are, the program keeps going, right? Yeah. So die to self every single day. At the end of the day, you're kind of irrelevant in a sense, right? What you do, the statement that you make, what you leave behind, your legacy, that has some relevance. But my thing is, man, come in and be a good teammate first and foremost, right? That can be your relevance. Be a good person, like pour into other people, press into other people, make meaningful relationships and friendships. Yes, work your absolute butt off in all that you do, right? God has given you the abilities and the opportunity to play in a college sport. So go make the most of it, of course, but don't miss up your moments to grow in a relationship with other people. Because I think, some of the hardest times in my life, I have brothers that I was able to press into when it comes to a lot of my past teammates. And I still talk to them every single day. And so these are the guys that I love, that I admire, that help mold me into the man that I am every single day. And so don't miss the moments on growing in relationship with one another. That's really what I would tell my freshman self.
That's so good. And along those lines of relationship, I would imagine it's a challenge because, I've got a son that plays college baseball and he's graduating this, next month. And I watched his transition, and I watched where you gravitate relationally, because you really are starting over in a sense, right? From a relational standpoint, what practical thing would you say to a kid coming in, just that maybe not at a Christian university, right? And the natural gravitation is going to be to the teammates, correct, of whatever sport you're playing in college. Did you do anything, or did you have anybody as a teammate that you kind of can give advice about how do you find that good pocket of believers that, really you can kind of walk together and do life with? Because it's all about, as a Christian, it's all about doing life with other Christians, right? It's all about being around other people that are like-minded, because that vacuum at college, especially, in life in general, can suck you in if you're around the wrong people. So, is there anything that you would suggest as far as getting involved and, in those little pockets of believers or people that are really solid in their faith?
My dad always said, you are who you hang out with, right? So I think the most important thing to understand is, yes, find a good group of believers, people that are similar in the faith. I don't know if that's starting up a team Bible study. So that's something that me and a lot of my best friends were able to do, is we started a team Bible study to where guys are able to come to the Bible study, believer or not, right? And just we're able to dive into God's word. We're able to do these different things. So sometimes you have to create good, meaningful friendships, right? Like they don't just fall in your lap. So go out, find the people that are interested in the same things as you and press into them, right? Grow each other, like completely, in a sense, mentor each other, like share life experiences, do these different things. But another thing that I struggled with my freshman and sophomore year was I came from a Christian high school into a Christian university. So I really gravitated toward these people that I was very like-minded with. But I've learned over the years, my junior and senior season specifically, and ones that are the most enriching seasons for me, not just athletically, but it was because I realized that, you know what, the people that are not like-minded as me, the ones that I probably wouldn't hang out with on a daily basis when it comes to the decisions they were making off the field, I went out of my way to grow in relationship with them too. And I think sometimes that is incredibly important, because God didn't just love the lovable people, the ones that are just like you, right? He went out of his way to be present with and love on the people that maybe you view as unlovable in the moment, right? Maybe those hard teammates that are hard to get along with, but going out of your way and saying, you know what, I want to grow in a relationship with that person too. And I think athletically speaking, so on the field, this really measured my sense of, am I invested in other people? Am I a good teammate? Was when I got to the point in my career when it was people that were pitchers, right? Trying to take my spot. I was able to actually find joy and satisfaction in celebrating their successes, right? Wow. I think it gets so easily lost, especially in college, because you're trying to compete, right? At the end of the day, you're all a team, but it's almost like you're competing within the team for your spot. Yeah. So it was to a point where it wasn't all about me. And I said, you know what? I don't care. I'm going to work my butt off to get that spot. But at the end of the day, if I don't, I'm going to find joy and satisfaction in my buddy and in my friend who is now thriving in that spot. I want everybody to thrive. And I think that's what makes a good teammate, is pushing yourself and holding yourself to a standard that then raises the standard for everybody else to find joy and satisfaction in everyone else's success.
That's true, man. And because I think it's a little bit lost on our society or the next generation now, because I think people are so, like you said, we're competing, but it almost seems like we're in a state of, well, I'm not going to be upset if they mess up because that opens a door for me, right? So that's just kind of the level of competition I see around right now. But to your point, if we want to stand out and be different, which is what we're called to do, and not in the way that the world says to stand out, of course, but it's countercultural for us to celebrate. I mean, the Bible talks about rejoice with those who rejoice, right? Like exactly. If we're happy for somebody's success that we're competing against, people are going to see that. So we're going to stand out. And they're going to gravitate toward us, which is what we're really called as believers to draw those people in, right? And so that's another way, like to your point of really reaching those that aren't maybe exactly where we are in our faith journey. So I don't want to steal. Hope we didn't steal our thunder for the last question because you hit it so well. But to close this out, finish a sentence for me if you would, and then we'll close it out. But so I know I made an impact in the lives of my teammates because
we still talk and communicate to this day, right? We still press into a relationship with each other to this day. Coach Jackson always said, when you get done with your career, whenever that is, whatever walk of life it is, you're not going to think back and remember the stats. You're not going to think back and remember the big games or the defining moments of your athletic career. Mm-hmm. You're going to look back and think about the friendships that you made and how people made you feel. And that's just the truth, right? When I think back to my athletic career, I think of my friends that made me feel like I was genuine. They had a genuine interest in me. Like they actually cared about me and they loved on me as a teammate and they invested in my life. Those are the guys that I talk to every single day. And so I don't really ever sit here and ponder, man, I remember that one game against the University of Virginia when I got the opportunity to pitch. No, honestly, that's not what even goes through my mind. It's, I wonder how those guys are doing. I hope they're doing well, right? You all go separate ways after college. That's the thing about it. You're in there for 4 years, and then all of a sudden, those brothers that you've made, everybody goes a different direction. So being able to stay connected with other people. So I would say I knew we had an impact on each other now that we're still 7, 8 years out of a high school career, 4 years out, 3, 4 years out of a college career, still in contact and growing in relationship with each other every single day.
Yeah. Yeah. That's big, man. I mean, I hope everybody can say that. And, one other little caveat off script, what would they say about you? What would some of those, if I got 5 or 6 of those guys in a room, what are they going to say about you and the kind of person, the kind of player, the kind of teammate you are?
I think it goes back to along the same lines of that Zach was present. And it took me a couple of years to understand that, right? So it didn't matter where we were. We could have been in the locker room after a long day of practice. It could have been in the bullpen after I just got done. It could have been I just walked off the mound pitching, right? Whether it was a good or a bad outing. But I really tried to learn the aspect of dying to self. And my dad always said, take failure and take success like it's a piece of bubble gum. Chew on it for a second and then spit it right back out. Right? So as soon as those are the hardest moments, who you are after you fail, right?
Yep.
So if I had a horrible outing, first couple of years through high school even, I struggled with this concept of allowing it to affect my outside relationships and who I was off the field, right? My identity was in a game. But slowly I understood, you know what? My identity is not in a game. Just because I maybe failed on the field does not define me as a failure, right? I am still loved. I am still chosen by a God who created me and wants nothing but the best for me, right? And when I realized that, I was able to get outside of myself, right?
Yeah.
Die to self. And I hate to say this, you don't die to self every day. You die to self 18, 20, 30 times a day, right? There's so many different moments within a day where it's like, you know what? I gotta die to self. I gotta press in. I gotta realize who I am because of whose I am. And then I can let my cup that I'm filling myself up with overflow onto other people, regardless of the circumstance, right? It's all a process. And embracing the process of life, the pains, the successes, whatever it brings.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. I think so as we close this out for the audience and for that person who, maybe found themselves in a similar situation as what Zach has talked about, or you find yourself in that point where, man, this whole game is becoming me. It's defining me. It's in my, when I look in the mirror, it's based on, my evaluation's based on what I did on the field that day. And I hope you're hearing him say to put some of that aside and focus on who God made and what you were created for on a deeper level, a bigger picture. And man, it makes some of this stuff seem really small, doesn't it? When we start taking that perspective. So my encouragement to the athlete right now, because you're hearing from an ex-college athlete who knows exactly what your thoughts are, your insecurities, your emotions, your feelings, your responsibilities. He knows what that role entails. And he's given you some really good gold, audience, to move forward in that and grow in that and really kind of die to self is what I hear him say, and really be in that moment with your teammates and understand that there's a longer term impact that you're having beyond those 4 years in college. So Zach, we appreciate, hey, tell the audience where they can come get some of your resources, either the podcast or any materials that you have out there.
Yeah. So specifically the podcast, it's the Built Different podcast. You can find that on all podcast platforms. It's on Facebook. You follow us on Facebook or Instagram, but really the heart behind the Built Different podcast is helping people understand that we can be built different on the solid foundation that Christ has to offer, right? We can be rooted and we can grow in our faith in him and choose thankfulness in every and all situation. So it's really talking about they're learning from some of America's motivational, spiritual, athletic experts in the world today. We get to really hear how they were able to press into their pains, right? And their tests in life, which then turned into a testimony, right? Everybody has a story. So listening to very unique stories and saying, you know what, that's something that I want to do. Pain is very temporary. No matter how hard it may be, no matter how hard it may seem, it will eventually subside, and just embracing the pain. So that's what it's all about, the Build Different podcast.
Yeah, so good, man. And I've listened to it. Audience, it's on fire. You got to listen. You got to check it out because Zach does a great job of talking to some of these really, high profile people who are just people like he talked about earlier. So go find it, subscribe to it, share it. Zach, again, thank you on behalf of our audience. Thank you so much for making time. It's been amazing, and your insight's been just tremendous. So, audience, college athlete, this one's for you, and I hope you got something out of it. But until next time, be blessed.